Welcome everybody to the College of Law's Cybersecurity Tips. My name is Dave Williams and I'm the CEO of FortiTech. So this one we're going to take a little bit of a look into tools to find out whether you have been hacked. So this is number 6 on our monthly cybersecurity tips. We've gone through security assessments and technology policy, starting out with a baseline and making sure your policies are right for the business and right for your staff. In April, we moved on to talking about passwords and multi-factor authentication and making sure that you've got those set up to protect access. In May, with the inevitable move of number of employees out to home offices with COVID, we talked about protecting data for remote users, which was a very timely thing. In June, we moved on to business continuity and backup and making sure that no matter where your data is, whether it be in the cloud, on your premise, in a server, on a desktop or a laptop, that it is backed up and you treat it just the same. So in July, we talked about firewalls and next generation AV that is moving away from antivirus that is predominantly based on a virus signature or a file snapshot, if you like, of the known virus, and looking at tools that are a little bit more intelligent, ones that actually look at what a piece of malware actually does and ranks those actions and then makes a decision based on that. Today, we're talking about detecting and tracking events and looking at, basically seeing what happened and knowing real time what's going on. We'll be moving on to patching and the Internet of Things in September. October will be all about dark web scanning and security awareness training for you and your staff. November, we'll talk about email anti-spam and stopping the number one attack method, phishing, before it even gets to you, which unfortunately accounts for about 2/3 of all attacks. And in December, we'll look at incident response and insurance. Basically, what do you do once you've been hacked? But without further ado, let's kick on. So in today's cybersecurity tips, we'll be looking at what is SIEM and have you been hacked, and finally finishing up with auditing for compliance. So why are we here? I guess cyber hacks have been increasing, and certainly since COVID's come along, we've seen a massive increase in the amount of attacks. FBI has reported a 300% increase in reported cyber crimes since people have moved out and started working from home. That has certainly made the amount of ways you can be attacked and the ways into your network and data a lot more. We're talking about home computers that may or may not necessarily have good protections in place, and being able to see what's going on with those and across your network in general. It seems cyber attacks are the leading cause of data breaches in Australia. We're talking roughly 2/3 of them that have been reported to the OAIC, can never say that right, and have been linked to malicious or criminal activity. There's certainly been reports in the newspapers lately that China has ramped up its attacks on Australia, and we certainly get enough from Russia and other people who are trying to attack us. A lot of these are a drive-by attack where it's an attack of opportunity. Think of those people who are hacking into your Office 365 or scanning your internet IPs as they go past. These are basically what happens in the background and things that we see all the time. And then there's those that are targeted malicious attacks, whether they be from staff internally or from those external to the business who are specifically targeting you. They're a little bit more rarer, but certainly they're not unknown. And just so that we know, the legal industry has remained consistently in the top 5 for notifiable data breaches since the scheme came into effect. So it's certainly something that's apt for most law firms now, and with the data they have, the cost of an attack is certainly quite detrimental to them. So the big stat in the middle, 206 days, this is one that's kind of important. Most businesses don't realize when they've actually been hacked. They realize when their data's put up for sale, or they realize when someone actually does the crypto locker attack and zips everything up and encrypts it. But they don't often realize at what point someone entered their network and actually had the ability to do what they wanted. The stat last year was 181 days. It's now gone up to 206. So that's 206 days 2/3 of a year that someone has been in your system, seeing what's going on, looking at what you do, how you do it, whether you communicate, who the people who make decisions are, pretty much gathering all their information up to make sure that when they attack you, that attack is of the utmost, impact to your business, and ensures that they're going to get whatever it is, whether that be damaging your business, if that's their outcome they're after, or locking you up and requiring you to pay for a ransom so that they can get some cryptocurrency out of you. So as an example, we had a law firm who got in contact with us after they'd been attacked, and they came in to find that on a Monday, everything was zipped up and they didn't have their data. And we found that they'd actually got into their backup jobs and edited the backups to not include any of the data files anymore. They did this so that backups would still complete and people would still get the emails coming through so that their backup jobs were completed and fine. But they did it and they said it and they sat there and waited for 6 months. The reason why it was 6 months is that was the retention period of backup. So after 6 months, they had no data on their systems, and they basically demanded, it was about 60,000 in Bitcoin to unlock everything. And being that they had no backups anywhere and no ability to get them back because they'd patiently waited for 6 months before they actually attacked them, they had to end up paying that Bitcoin to get things unlocked. And paying 60,000 is certainly a big cost, but it wasn't just that. It took them a week to negotiate the 60,000 and get payment across. Not every business has that amount of cash on hand, especially in Bitcoin. And it took another week to actually decrypt those files. So they were still down for 2 weeks and unable to trade for 2 weeks, and out $60,000 just to pay the Bitcoin, plus our cost to go through and assess what was going on and get them in a position where they could actually start running their business again. So the impact is definitely huge, especially in the legal industry. And if you're a small business, as the stat says, 43% of cyber attacks target small businesses. They aren't just going after the McCulloch Robinsons of the world. They are pretty much going after any target they can. If they can make $100 in Bitcoin out of you, they'll do it. If they can make $100,000 in Bitcoin out of you, they'll do it. Currently, the stat for the largest request of Bitcoin for a crypto locker attack has been $1 million US. So they're definitely asking for a lot of money if they can, and they will try and get every cent they can out of you. So, 34% of breaches involve insider threats. And we're talking about staff and those people who have a knowledge of your business already and are attacking you from the inside. You may have heard of Landmark White, a firm that was doing valuations for a number of banks for real estate. They were attacked by an insider threat, and it scrubbed about $30 million out of the value of their business and basically crippled them. They've found that there were 2 people involved in that insider threat now, and they've taken them to court, and they'll probably get charged for criminal charges. But at this point, the damage has been done. That happened last year and has been something that's been in the news now for over a year as they've been dragged through. So, they've effectively lost their business based on the back of that. And the average life cycle of a breach of 314 days. I expect this to go up, but that is from someone going into your systems to those systems being contained. So even if they've been in there for 206 days, you're talking about another 100 days, give or take, to actually fix the problem and to get them out and to get you in a place where you can start running your business again. All throughout these cyber tips, we've tried to relate everything to the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is an American-based framework, and it is one of the better ones that is a nice visual way of representing all the stages, or all the areas, if you like, of cybersecurity and being able to relate a particular thing we're trying to do to it. In today's one, when we're talking about SIEM, it is really about detect and a little bit about respond. So it will allow you to look at the anomalies and give continuous monitoring of what's going on and alert of those things. And it provides a little bit of analysis. So there's tools that are getting smarter in SIEM these days, and they'll actually be able to pull out a bit of data so you don't get, the whole point of SIEM is to look at all your logs. So rather than look at every single log and have to go through millions and millions of logs, it will do analysis and get you down to those things that are the minimum that you need. So what is SIEM exactly? The best description I've heard is SIEM is a flashlight that allows you to look under the rocks and fix those problems before they become issues, versus the bug spray that is everything else, such as AV and firewalls, that kills them off. So this identifies those problems. It is not necessarily there to stop them, but having that information of what happened and how is certainly quite important. The way it works is it uses data collection to grab all your log files from everything, whether that be Office 365, your firewall, a local computer, servers, access to files, whatever it is. It pulls all of these into one central piece of data storage. From there, you have policies and rules set up, and it provides a bit of analysis over the top. Some of the SIEMs these days incorporate AI, which will go through and make sure that any issues that aren't particularly of interest, things that pop up, Windows as an example will post errors that aren't actually errors, and you can ignore them, but you need AI to be able to figure out what's going on. And the AI can also join the dots. With a SIEM, you're getting information from a number of things, so you can see if someone's gone through a firewall onto a server and then out to a desktop, or from a desktop onto the server and then out to everyone else's desktops, and it can join those dots for you, which is a great way to get the correlation, of someone actually doing an attack to that actual outcome of that attack. So those are the 4 parts that basically make up a SIEM: the data collection, the storage of that data, the policies and rules that drive the behavior, and then the consolidation and the correlation to actual attacks. So the 4 steps, I guess, collecting the data, normalizing and aggregating that, detecting all those threats. So normally with the aggregation of the data and the normalization, that's when we use AI to basically go through and pull out those things that are definitely worth looking at. They are then thrown in front of humans to make decisions. We've found that you can have all the automated tools in the world, but in the end, they tend to have false positives and false negatives and generally don't do a great job. But if you pull out, even a small fraction, 1 or 2% that can't be automated and made decisions on, and put them in front of a human, you get a better result. Humans are great at using intuition, which machines just don't have, and can find things that machines never will. And then once that's done, step 4, identifying those breaches and investigating the alerts, and then being able to move on to actual remediation. What are we going to do about it? This is a tool that allows you to actually see what's gone on and how they've done it, and then come up with the best plan to stop it. Sometimes letting things go on a little bit further is the best plan, so you can identify where people are coming from and what they're doing and how it works, versus just necessarily stopping it at that point. You may not actually identify the attacker or the reason for their being attacked. The Australian Signals Directorate is certainly big on putting in SIEM to see what's going on during an attack and waiting, and literally just looking at what data they're touching, how they're doing it, what tools they're using, and where it's going. And that can often allow them to identify who the attacker is by the methods and the destinations, and get a bit of a feel for whether it's a overseas state-based player, such as China's government attacking us, which does happen regularly, or whether it's maybe an organized crime from Russia who's doing it purely for the economic costs. So there's certainly some ways to, not just stop it, but be able to find out what's going on and contain it better that way. So the capabilities of a SIEM. So this is sort of all the moving parts that are there. You've got the forensics, which are really good at looking at what happened in the past. So SIEM's not just about identifying stuff that's happening now, which it can do, but also being able to go back in the past. This is particularly important if you've got an employee that's left. We've used these tools to identify when employees have been siphoning data off for months, which may be relevant to their job. Hard to stop someone when you know that they're meant to be accessing that data, but when you've seen that they've been saving to Excel and then exporting those files, and they've been doing that for month after month, you can get a bit of an ongoing picture and a snapshot of where they're going, just being able to look at the log forensics there. The other thing it can do is look at the file integrity. Are your systems actually working the way they should? Have we identified a problem with a file server that's been slowly corrupting its files? Things that SIEM can do that you just can't do with AV or any other tool like that. So it's certainly an advanced tool for finding out what's going on, and then moving on to the real-time alerting to actually be able to put things in front of that human and say, hey, look, we actually have a problem now. We need to do something about that. So have you been hacked? This is really what it comes down to with a SIEM tool. It can identify the fact that you've been hacked, and often in what's called an advanced persistent threat. That is, they've used a number of separate tools and a number of separate hacks, if you like, to get where they need to go. And some of these can fly under the radar. Step one, getting on and putting a back door in. Step two, being able to link systems together. And step three, being able to collect and move that information offsite. And then step four, actually executing the attack. That would be considered an advanced persistent threat. They've done a number of things with a number of tools. It's not just a piece of malware has run up on a laptop and has stopped things there. And this is certainly one of the things that seems very good. Looking at the activity coming in and out and seeing what is suspicious and being able to identify whether this is something that is, a normal piece of work for the business. Is it a log on at a weird time? Is it, somebody moving data to a location they've never done before? Is it something unusual? And then being able to, look at those threats and correlate them. Can we join two threats together to make something that's now an advanced persistent threat? Do we, see if something's happening on a server? Is it related to someone getting in through a firewall 10 minutes ago? That sort of thing. And it can help identify DDoS attacks, which are basically being flooded with attacks from a number of locations to bring down a system. If you think that servers online can only serve a number of things at one time, you can stop something from working, like a website, or anything like that. Or if it's Telstra in the papers recently, where their domain name server went down, and they originally thought that was from a denial of service attack. That's basically flooding it with requests until such time it's unable to actually answer any of those requests, and it basically stops working. The bottom part of this is probably the most important. As much as SIEM on its own is a great tool to be able to, put that light on the problem and see what's going on, you really need to have that security operations center as part of it. You can identify the problem, but you really need to have the human element to come in and be able to figure out, is this an issue? And then use tools like endpoint detection and response to actually be able to stop those threats, remediate them, and roll them back. We find that the three parts, having a SIEM to identify what's going on, grab all the information, having a SOC to be able to sit there and make intelligent decisions and remediate, and then having the tools like endpoint detection and response to quarantine a computer and allow the SOC guys to get on and actually be able to figure out, how do we fix this problem and get it back to where it should be. We find that those three things together, are quite synergistic and certainly help protect businesses. So how can a SIEM help you? First one is security monitoring, being able to see what's going on and tell you real time when you've actually had the first breach. So you don't have to wait another 200 days to find out it's a significant issue, but you can catch it early on. Advanced threat detection, as I stated, it's those persistent threats that move across one thing to the next, and being able to identify whether it's a malicious insider who's then exfiltrating that data out, or whether it's somebody who's come in remotely and has then started to move that data out. It just enables you to see things across a number of different devices and make intelligent decisions. So from our perspective, those two things are certainly big. And forensics and incident response. You probably will get attacked at some point in time, but how you respond to that attack is really important. Under the notifiable data breach scheme, you've got a number of options you can do when you've been breached. You can put something up on your website and publicly announce you've been breached. You can mail or email everyone that you have in your contact lists and tell them that you've been breached. Or if you actually know what was actually touched, whose data that was, whether that data was actually sensitive or not, you can then just contact those people who were affected and limit the impact of an actual breach by only being able to talk to those people that really need to be notified of what's going on. If it was, say, a Office 365 mailbox that was hacked, this gives you the ability to see, well, what emails did they open? Were they able to exfiltrate any of that data, or did they just look at it? Then go back to those parties who were in those emails, if the data in them was sensitive, and be able to inform them there of a plan. Hey, your data was accessed. It was a contract that we were working on. What we're going to do is rewrite it from scratch again, and that should solve that problem. So that you can cover your bases there and limit how much reputational damage is done purely by being able to see forensically what happened and what was touched. And the last one, from a compliance and reporting point of view, being able to go back to any auditors or organisations that that regulate you and saying this is what we've done to ensure things haven't gone a particular way, or this is what happened, so that you can actually provide that information. There are a number of companies out there these days that are requesting more and more from their suppliers, and that include their legal I guess, and making sure that they are doing the right thing. And I expect places like Queensland Law Society will start increasing the amount of compliance reporting that's required for a number of organisations. So, as I was just discussing, the notifiable data breach scheme uh, does require you to actually assess the damage that's happened during a breach and be able to get to the right people with that. This basically stops you from having to advertise publicly that you were breached, and allows you to deal with it more in a private manner. So we find that auditing aspect of it is certainly very important. Versus, say, that you've had your Office 365 breached, and now you have to tell everyone that you can find who has an email in there that it happened. At least now you can go through and figure out what people are actually relevant. And that just goes into a little bit more detail about the Privacy Act and the APPs, and how this is allows you to get to the crux of it. Have you actually impinged on someone's sensitive data, or was it just their name and address that's publicly available? Those certain things you can sort of help narrow things down a bit more. As we just talked about, from a compliance perspective, you may have things like PCI DSS or the Australian privacy principles. You may have any legal or ethical standards that you have to uphold. And you may actually have a retention one. We know a lot of people have financial records that are kept and have to be retained. Being able to retain those and actually check on the integrity of those during your retention is certainly important. And then being able to know what to do when it comes to an incident response. A good way of looking at this is Target over in the US had a massive hack, and they lost literally like 130 million credit cards. And what happened is all their POS units were attacked, and they had SIEM in place, and SIEM allowed them to see the attack going on and to formulate a way to stop it happening and actually roll it back. The damage was done pretty quickly, but it could have been a lot worse than that. They were able to basically stop the attack and get things back to a manageable situation without crippling the business and not being able to actually process payments, which I think would have cost them a lot more than having to deal with the fact that they lost credit cards. So the incident response part of it is certainly quite a big part as well. So here's some tips when it comes to selecting and working with SIEMs. The big one is defining your requirements. What are you trying to get out of it? What is of value to you specifically? Is it the monitoring? Is it the auditing? Is it a compliance need? Talk to everyone who's going to be involved and come up with a plan and make sure that you know what you're trying to get out of it. And then look at the scope of the SIEM. If in this day and age with people working from home, do we want to put the agents on their computers at home to extend the network out? Or are we just going to look at the office? I think as we're starting to move more and more remote, grabbing more and more information from more and more endpoints is becoming, I guess, a bit of a requirement. We can get, as pointed out by the FBI, 300% more attacks just since COVID. So being able to get the data from those endpoints certainly makes it a bit easier to find out what's going on. And define the audit data. What are you auditing? How long do you need to keep it for? Is it something you want to keep for 6 months, a year? Is it something that you want to keep for 7 years? Does it have any evidentiary rules that you want to take into perspective? There are certainly a number of areas with that audit data and storing it and keeping it that you want to keep in mind. And the last one, have an incident response plan in place. It's all good and proper having a SIEM, and it's all good and proper being able to identify when you've had something go wrong, but having a plan to actually attack and fix that and mitigate that's certainly a fairly big thing to have. And we'll be talking about incident response in a few more months and going into a lot more detail on that and the sort of things you want to keep in mind when it comes to responding to an incident. And I guess ensure you are leveraging your SIEM and you're actually using it. It's not much point putting it in if you're not going to to look at what's going on, monitoring employee access as it is now, finding out those people that are doing things they shouldn't be doing. That's certainly a big thing you can get out of it immediately. And, being able to look at your perimeter defenses and check on the status. We see a lot of people who will go and buy a firewall and put it in, but then they'll never actually check anything, and they'll never do any penetration tests. So they'll never identify if there's anything that's actually been left open or something that was set up subsequently. And being able to go back and look at that and just make sure, things are working as the way they should. And then the last one is resource integrity. When it comes to storing data can corrupt over time. You could have a hard drive that's failing and slowly corrupting everything that's on it. It could just be an operating system issue, and being able to make sure that the integrity of what you got remains throughout that period, that it's not slowly becoming more and more corrupt, is quite big. So we think that this, especially for backups, if you want to sit on a backup, you guys want to know that it's going to restore when you need to, and being able to check the integrity of those is certainly pretty big. So that's it today for talking about SIEMs and being able to look into what's happening with your business and identifying whether you've actually been attacked or not a long time before the necessary big payload hits you, I guess. And it gives you the tools to be able to understand what's going on and get a little bit more in depth to seeing what's happening across your business, whether that be to look at any insider threats that may be happening, which is certainly a growing reality for a lot of businesses, or to identify those persistent threats that are slowly working their way through your network, or purely just as an incident response, being able to make sure that when you go back, you're responding specifically to those people that have been affected and have lost sensitive data, so that you're getting the most out of your tool and making sure that your business is the most protected.